Hi everyone, welcome to the second video for the Week 8 content for UOSS. In this video I'm going to introduce you to some basic conventions around academic writing. It's quite important because you may have not had many opportunities to kind of read academic writing. So you've probably had limited exposure to academic writing apart from this course, and maybe from that you also have some misconceptions about what it actually is. So in this video I'm going to go over some basic guidelines, and this should really help you for completing your essay, and also a lot of these will apply to future assessments that you'll do, and where there may be some difference between this guideline and what you may do in the future. I'll also mention that. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so what is academic writing style? This is a fun little cartoon strip that shows, I guess, some of the misconceptions around what it means to write in an academic way. And you might have heard yourself, some people say, or even thought yourself, that academic writing uses really long sentences, that it's unnecessarily verbose, that it's complex or dense, all these big words, and etc. So hopefully convince you by the end of this that academic writing is not those things, and it's actually helpful to think about maybe some of the reasons why that is the case, why we have that perception. Okay, so unlike as was shown in that previous cartoon, academic writing actually aims for clarity, precision, and balance. And together we would say that these are what constitute an academic style. And as we go through in the following slides, I'll go over and explain a little bit more about, what do these actually mean? What does it mean to have clear writing or to write with precision? Okay, so firstly, academic writing uses formal, impersonal language. So in that sense, it's not, the informal language that we might use more in everyday conversation, that we use more verbally, and it's not personal in the sense, and this can actually vary quite a bit between disciplines and assessment tasks, but in general we don't use things like personal pronouns such as I, you, we, and we try and aim for an impersonal language. And there are, various kind of reasons for that, as well as critiques of it. But for now, it's just important to know that we aim to be formal. Academic writing also uses hedging. So this is when claims are expressed in cautious or tentative language. And I think, sometimes this is, when you're a student writing, you don't always have to do this, and sometimes it can come off quite weak. So it's a bit of a balance between using hedging when it's needed and helpful, but also knowing when to make a claim and when to do that. So in your thesis statement, for example, it's probably best not to do hedging because that can weaken your argument overall, and it sets up the argument in quite a weak way. But if in other parts of your writing it might be okay to do this, to show that you're aware that this is that there are other ways of looking at this, and that it's, you're being tentative about your claims because more could be said that you can't say there. Academic writing also uses full word forms, so no abbreviations. So while we do that in, for example, you might even get that on your feedback, or you might get that on, you might see that in notes or something else distributed in your class. For your actual assessments, you use full word forms. And this also can vary. I have seen academic articles and chapters that have abbreviations in them, and it's but they tend to be quite uncommon. The kind of more traditional sense is that you spell out all of your words fully. You also write in complete sentences and paragraphs. So no fragments, no bullet points. And this again also can change depending on the kinds of assessment and what you're asked, but it's always good to assume that that's the case, that you're expected to use a complete sentence. Academic writing does not use extra long sentences without good reason. And I think what's really important here is to think more about the meaning that you're trying to get across. Is this clear? If you have a really long-winded sentence, you're probably going to lose your reader, and it's going to be they're going to not going to follow what you're saying. So extra long sentences are actually avoided, unlike in the cartoon strip we saw before, this perception of what academic writing is. And also it does not use overly complex and pompous language. That is also something that we try and avoid. Like I said, it's not foolproof. There will be academic texts out there that do have overly complex and pompous language, but they are few and far between. The majority we aim for clear, often quite simple language that can be understood by others. There are some exceptions to that, of course, like technical language. But by and large aim to be clear rather than complex. Academic expression. Okay, so as I mentioned before, here are some tips that you can use to actually do what we just said previously. So how do you kind of put this into practice? Well, you can avoid personal pronouns. This is a very easy one. So I think that, here's an example, I think that the concept of the bush legend encourages us to ignore our diversity. Perhaps the concept of the bush legend conceals the diversity of Australian society. Okay, even the second one here that has removed the personal pronoun has become slightly more, let's say, sophisticated, because it has kind of here also mentioned Australian society. And I think often that when students, I think often when students use I think, they can just simply remove that phrase and make a statement, and it's quite easily solved. Avoid addressing the reader as you. So here's an example. You can see the results in Table 1. Much better to write this as the results can be seen in Table 1. Okay, so some more guidelines. We have first, avoid contractions and abbreviations. This is very simple. You can easily do a search for when you've used contractions, or a quick glance over your assessment before you submit it to make sure that you don't. It's fine when you're drafting for yourself or if you're making notes, but for final submission you want to change those to full words. Another tip is to use tentative language. So we've got here, for example, a sentence that is incredibly sweeping. It's a generalization. Everyone uses email, and the traditional letter no longer exists. Rightio. So the next one here we've got to write a much better sentence is we've got some research first, not just making a statement without any evidence to back it up. So we've got here, and not only the research, but the use of tentative language comes in this part. It's got the suggests that a majority of people. So we're not even stating that this research says definitively, because that would also ring alarm bells. What research would say that? We've got instead here, this research suggests that the majority. So two elements here are being tentative. And some examples of tentative language, it could be argued that perhaps these findings suggest that to some extent. It would seem that somewhat. So even here you can recognise also the extent word, which is in your essay question. So in some sense, by writing an essay question like that for UOSS, we're encouraging you to acknowledge some tentative claim, that you can make. Also avoid slang and colloquialisms. So all in all, the government has been pretty hopeless when it comes to sorting out the pokies, regardless of whether or not it's true or not. There's a couple of things you could do here. One, pokies, not everyone's going to understand what that is. That's a very Australian kind of way of saying poker machine. And we'd also say that, we're talking here about the whole industry, so we could even be a little bit more specific with that and a little bit more sophisticated again. So in some, the government's regulation of the poker machine industry has been inadequate. Of course, you would need to back that up with some explanation and evidence as to why that has been the case. Another one, romance genre fiction is a girl thing. Oh, so offensive. Romance genre fiction has a large female readership. Yeah, so it's actually not using kind of these, general and somewhat offensive kind of terms that you might hear in everyday language, or maybe you don't, but there'll certainly be this kind of informal language that you've heard at some point, and to actually explain what you mean and describe more appropriately what you mean. Avoid cliches. Cliches should be avoided like the plague. Oh, that's bad. Cliches should be avoided, yeah? So there's a couple ones here, and while you may be looking at these thinking, oh, there's no way that these would appear in an essay, wrong. I have seen these in essays. I've seen a lot of in this day and age. I've seen in the modern age, or in these times. What are you talking about? At the melting pot. That's another one I've heard quite a bit. Read quite a bit. So these are. Avoid all these cliches and just be really clear about what are you actually referring to in this day and age. Are you actually referring to the contemporary time? Are you, also give a date, give years, give something that is more substantiated by the evidence also that you have. Avoid general jargon or buzzwords. Incentivize, monetize, bring to the table, ballpark figure, wellness, trending topic. These are all kind of general kind of jargon that you might see a lot, especially online. And so you just be really a lot more specific about what you're actually referring to there. Tautologies and redundancies, very unique. Something's unique or it's not. An over-exaggeration, well, if it's exaggerated, it's kind of over the top. A true fact, yeah, okay. Repeat again, and you see also how we say these things a lot when we're talking, and that's fine. But when you're writing, just you've got to look out for these historical events of the past, legitimate credibility, right? Unique, an exaggeration, a fact, repeat, historical events, credibility. Avoid rhetorical questions. We have to ask ourselves, do we really care about the citizens of other countries? Okay, this is a rhetorical device. You will see these sometimes in academic texts. A lot of other academics actually view that as quite bad style for writing. So what we're trying to teach you here is also, a good way to do it. Not just a question of rules so much as how to make your writing. How do you make writing better according to these conventions? You could say, for example, it could be argued that the citizens of one state do not care about the citizens of other states. Rhetorical questions are always easy to rephrase, I think. Avoid sensationalist or journalistic language. This is the final guideline. The recent conduct of the finance industry has been spectacularly careless to the point of blatant criminality. Okay. It could be argued that the recent conduct of the finance industry has not been simply negligent but illegal. So you might find this incredibly boring, or maybe it's not as interesting, but it is also not kind of, let's say, puffed up with sensational language that doesn't actually tell us what it's referring to. Blatant criminality, what do you mean? You just mean illegal. Yeah, so it's actually not about making it boring so much as it is making it clear, being precise, and removing any of that kind of extra content that's not needed, those extra wordiness that's not needed. In class, we will come back and we will do some activities where you get to rewrite a paragraph using kind of some of these guidelines. So I will see you then.